Well, I wish everybody in Europe happy lunchtime and everyone in the Philippines a good evening. I'm about to start my Insta Live with Maria Ressa, who hopefully will join us anytime soon. Um, I think I'll just give her 1 or 2 minutes and then she will be with us and we can start discussing with her. Maybe for those who are in the loop already while we wait for Maria, I would like to let you know why I decided to do this Insta Live. We are discussing in the European Parliament, also today with the European Council, so much the effects of the corona pandemic on us in the European Union. But what we often forget is what the effects of this pandemic are on countries where the health system is already weak, where the human rights situation is already weak, and where we don't have governments we trust, but sadly governments that people are afraid of, that some people mistrust, that many people don't feel represented by. And Maria Ressa comes from the Philippines, where I also lived for more than a year. She's a journalist there working for Rappler, and she wanted to join us for this discussion. I'm still waiting for her to send the request. Well, let's see. Maybe we give her 1 or 2 more minutes. All of you who, just to use these minutes wisely, all of you who want to already ask maybe me questions or sending questions for the discussions later on, feel free to already start putting them into the comments. Feel free to start putting them in the Q&A. And now I see Maria Ressa is watching us. Maria, you need to request to join. Perfect.
So I added Maria and she should be with us in a minute. Hey, it worked.
Hello.
It's so nice to see you, Maria.
Thank you for having me. I'm so sorry. This is kind of cool.
It's your first Insta Live?
It's my first Insta Live. So I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta follow. I just have to follow. So thank you for asking me to do this.
So now I'm even more excited to have you with me if it's your first Insta Live. So that's great. So now I see we already have 15 people joining us. Usually it goes like people will turn in, they will join, then usually they leave or some stay for the whole time, but it's like a continuous discussion and people just, I think it's around evening in the Philippines, it's lunchtime in Europe. So people just join a few minutes with us and get to know a bit more about you, about the Philippines, about human rights in the Philippines especially. So I'm super happy to have you with me. And what I would do, because I can now see that there are also loads of Filipinos joining us, I would quickly introduce myself, quickly introduce you, and then we just start the chat, and it's like an easy chat for like half an hour, a bit more. I'm Hannah Neumann. I'm a member of the European Parliament. I'm working on human rights and peace and conflict. And actually that passion for human rights and peace and conflict grew when I was in the Philippines. And that is this very special link because I'm actually an Ateneo alumni. I studied at Ateneo for 6 months. And then I worked with the German Development Service in Mindanao. And I even wrote half of my PhD about the conflict in Mindanao. And that's why I'm very much hooked with the country and how people are doing in the country. I was I'm still very distressed with how it went since Duterte took power, I have to say frankly, and I'm following the situation carefully. And that's how I got to know about you, Maria, and about your case and about Rappler and everything, because Maria is a journalist in the Philippines. She grew up in Manila, where I studied for a while. She also went to university, I think, in the US and other European countries. You specialized on terrorism in Southeast Asia in your work for CNN and others. So that's where we have a link, because I worked on MLF, Abu Sayyaf and others in my PhD.
Fantastic.
And she founded Rappler, which is, no one knows it in Europe, but it's I think the biggest news agency in the Philippines. Is it the biggest?
No, we're actually probably in terms of Alexa ranking, we're 4th ranking, but we're very small. We're about 100 people, and ABS-CBN, for example, which you know, Hannah, they have in their newsroom, which I used to manage, they have 1,000 people, and all of ABS-CBN is 11,000 people, and they've been shut down. Anyway, I'll shut up.
No, but that's it already. So basically, and Maria, Well, this you came under pressure with Rappler because somehow this Duterte guy doesn't like influential people who are not of his opinion. So you became a bit under fire, and Rappler's under fire, and you just had a lawsuit that ended, I think, Monday. Was it Monday or Tuesday?
Monday in the
Amal
Philippines,
Clooney
yeah.
is taking care of you. That was new information, but that is wonderful. Two strong women together running against this dude. So maybe for the beginning, you just want to share a bit about the case and about the human rights and press freedom situation in the Philippines.
Sure. I mean, well, first, thank you. And I'm so thrilled to hear that you actually went to school in the Philippines. That's fantastic. I don't even know where to begin, except that I am old. I have been a journalist for a long time. Next year it'll be 35 years, right? And I
That's as old
ran
as I am.
See, I knew you were younger because you were doing this Instagram. But I feel old, and I feel like I've aged significantly in the last 4 years. I was here before Duterte. I will be here after. I feel like the country has fundamentally changed. I became a reporter in 1986 here with all of the gusto of a democracy, and I always thought that by the time I'm in my 50s, this is going to be an amazing place.
For those who don't know it, 1985, 1986 was the time Philippines went into democracy after, well, some other fascists. And it kind of all started and blossomed, and people were very confident that it would now be open and flourishing and prospering. Just giving some context to people who don't know the Philippines. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Maria.
I think more interesting about that is that this country actually started the People Power Revolt in 1986, the peaceful ousting of a dictator. That was our claim to fame, right? And I became a reporter then, and then I went on and I covered Southeast Asia for CNN, and my career began with covering the movement to democracy of most Southeast Asian countries, from authoritarian one-man rule. I covered here. I covered the end of nearly 32 years in Indonesia, of Prime Minister Mahathir in Malaysia, coming down in 2004, and then coming back again later. But Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. So I feel like it's so sad to see that pendulum of democracy that swings this way now starting to swing back. And that's really what we've seen happening. I decided when I was 40 years old, I was going to come home. I was going to choose a home. And I could have gone back to the United States. I chose the Philippines because I think if you've been here, there's something really, I love the culture. It's not a cynical culture. It wasn't before a cynical culture. Today, it's extremely different. And then when we started Rappler, so the other part is I headed the largest news group in the Philippines. That's how I first came home. And I did that for 6 years, the network that has now been shut down just last month. And then in 2012, we decided that we were going to try to figure out what the future of journalism looks like. And I think that includes technology. That's why we started Rappler. And I went from managing 1,000 journalists to 12.
So how is Rappler working, just for the Europeans? What is Rappler different from ABS-CBN?
So I spent most of my career as a broadcast journalist. Rappler is kind of like this, which is why, Hannah, I'm thrilled you asked me to do this because I've never done this. I thought we're really, adapted technology and social media platform. So this is very cool. That's what Rappler began in 2012. And because we embraced social media platforms, Facebook in particular, we grew 100 to 300%. And our demographic was 18 to 35 years old. That was where the chunk was. We grew very fast until 2016. And then 2016 was when President Duterte was elected. So as a startup, I was aiming to break even 2016, right? That was, and we actually were on track. And then when President Duterte came into power, within a few hours, people started dying in a brutal drug war. And
he announced it. No one believed he would do it, and he did it even worse. So that was at least my assessment from the outside. I was even there, and that is something that struck me a lot as coming from the European Union. I was in Mindanao and Kitapawan. I think it was during the first year where he took over.
Right.
And a friend of mine, she came in the morning into the office, and she said, Hannah, I just wanted to excuse myself for not being like top notch today. But a friend of mine, her husband was killed in the war on drugs, and now she has to look after all of the kids. And I was struck how she related to it as if it was like something that happens daily. And for me, it was like, we need to riot, we need to go into the streets, we need to throw down this dictatorship kind of attitude. And she was just like, these things happen. And that's how it changed, and how kind of normal the violence became. And really, as someone who has been there in 2004 already, it was shocking.
Yes. And it is. And part of that is because of technology, because of social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
The normalization and the kind of, so why did we become targeted? Because we questioned the drug war. How many people have been killed? We watched the numbers getting played with, and we held government to account. We started something we called the impunity series. And
you had these pictures, right? So every time somebody was killed, you published the picture of that person, and the numbers were incredibly high. What is the number that you documented of now? By now, is it?
Well, so to give you an idea, right, we had one reporter going out every night, and in July, she was coming back with at least 8 dead bodies a night. And then later, once you had the Commission on Human Rights, the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, they estimated December last year that there were at least 27,000 people killed.
Whoa.
That's a number that's been quoted at the UN. But to be honest, the Philippine police says they have 6,000 plus, but you can't tell.
But
you
even that
know.
official number of 6,000 plus, without, I mean,
it's huge.
It's a killing without somebody having been taken to court, properly questioned or anything. It's just going somewhere,
Correct.
Suspecting them of owning, dealing with drugs and killing them. That's what we're talking about. And they even commit that they done at least 6,000.
Yes. So even that alone should be enough. But for me, it was the fact that at a certain point, the authorities published that there were 33 people being killed every night. And that was, it was easy to ignore it. And here's the reason why. Because social media, and I'll call up Facebook again, right? The other reason we got in trouble is because we did a 3-part series on the Duterte administration's use of Facebook, of disinformation networks, and how it was manipulating public opinion, data-filled. We showed the networks that were doing it and the narratives that were being pushed. And the people who were first targeted on social media was anyone who actually questioned the drug war, right? Then after that, it was the journalist. After the journalist, it was human rights activists, and then opposition politician. So after we did this 3-part series and it was first, we called it Weaponizing the Internet. The second part of the series, these are 2 things I wrote. The second one was how Facebook algorithms impact democracy, how we were being manipulated. And then the third was manufactured consensus. We took a look at a sock puppet network of 26 fake accounts, and then we counted manually. It took us 3 months to figure out how many other accounts do 26 fake accounts this network impact. They touched at least 3 million other accounts, right? So that gives you a scale. After we did that series, we got pounded online.
Well,
attacks.
I can imagine they would have hated that.
So this is the beginning of the attacks. I would say that the Duterte administration, that my government has attacked us since 2016. So
and
first
also,
it was
because you have this very nice, polite language of putting it. Being attacked means you have to walk around with bodyguards and bulletproof vests.
It's not one of the. I'm not macho about this. I'm just pragmatic, and it is a bad sign when you have to worry about your safety and the safety of the people you work with. We have increased our security 6 times, and it is sad. But let me tell you the methodology, because I think it's happening in many other countries around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So first, in 2016, it began with online attacks, exponential attacks, inciting to hate. And these attacks target an individual. So in that case, they targeted me, an average of 90 hate messages per hour.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 2 goals for this, right? The first is to just pound you to silence so that you shut up and doubt yourself. And then the second is for everyone else, so that they create a bandwagon effect. It's
So
fake.
everybody else does the pressure on you as well,
Everyone
and
believes it.
and then some of your so-called friends would also start to question, and then your parents
Correct.
would go, "Why on earth do you have to do this?" And
Right.
it's
Correct.
more
So you're
pressure.
familiar.
And there, well, I mean, it's surely not the scale that you face, but I chose actually to be active in politics in my home country when the right-wing nationalists won 20% in my constituency. So I'm not wearing bulletproof vests, and people like you inspired me forever to do what I do. But yes, we also have this pressure, and then there are moments where you say, "Why on earth am I actually doing that?" And then you have to get up again, because otherwise they have won. And that's why I'm so happy to see even after that case. And I don't know if you can follow the many comments that we see in the Insta Live. So many people wishing you courage and saying what a great job you're doing. And for all those who watch, we now have even more than 50 people. You can put into the comment section. You also can put questions to either Maria or me. Maria, what can we do? What can the people watching us do? What can people like me do who are in some kind of responsible jobs?
I think keep demanding that our constitution is followed. Filipinos should be the first to do that. But let me just quickly tell you the three things that we've lived through, right? So the first is this astroturfing online. Then the weaponization of social media is followed by President Duterte repeating the same attack. So in 2016, they seeded Maria isn't a journalist, she's a criminal. Seeded. Hard to believe at that point because I've had a long career that's very public. And then after President Duterte attacked us, a week later, we got the first subpoena. And in 2018, the government filed 11 cases against me and Rappler. 2019, I was issued 8 arrest warrants, so I posted bail. I was arrested twice and detained once. The government wanted me to feel their power. And then 2020, this is probably the fastest libel case in the Philippines. At least that's what my lawyer tells me, and he's a former Supreme Court spokesman, Ted Te. What was at stake? The legal acrobatics of this case, just to even bring it to court, is incredible because it violates 2 principles, and we will challenge this again. The first is you should never actually apply a law retroactively. That's
because the article
global.
everything is about was published before the law came into place, and then I think you changed 1 or 2 letters, so you just did minor corrections, and that's why they said it would have been a new one, and they started it, which is a bit Kafkaesque. As we would say.
I think that's the right word, and I haven't really used that, so I might borrow that. Yeah, Kafkaesque.
It's Kafka, and he wrote a book. It's called The Process, and where basically you're running in circles. And actually, it reminded me a bit of what.
No, that's actually correct, because this has implications for Filipinos on 2 fronts, right? The first is this idea of republication, which, by the way, is the charge. That's what we were accused of, that we republished, and what was most interesting to me is that the actual verdict never ever addressed that, never addressed the actual charge, right? And created this whole other very strange verdict. Anyway, so after the republication, the other thing that had to happen was to change the period of prescription, the statute of limitations of libel. It was changed from 1 year to 12 years. That's insane. That means every Filipino now, right? Every Filipino who posts on Facebook, you can now be sued for libel for 12 years.
So libel applies not only to like official pages like ABS-CBN or your Rappler, but basically it's with everybody who posts something on the web.
Absolutely. Anyone who posts online. I mean, for the pandemic, our lockdown, there were people who were arrested for what they posted online. In fact, I just saw an artist in Cebu filed a case against the person who had her arrested, right? I do see a question about the case that
is it targeting women more than men, Maria? Because you just mentioned your Cebu friend also.
Yes, absolutely. And this is data that we have, right? The kinds of attacks online target women 10 times more than men. That's at least 10 times more than men. And, you know, the person who
But
really
the Philippines is a country of such strong women. I mean, even for me, it was often just to see what they do in the Philippines, see how strong the women are there. So that's also a big change to see these attacks against women now.
But think about it like this. There's always a macho culture that underlined
Yeah,
it,
that's
right?
true.
And then when you get someone like President Duterte, who of his generation, his biases, he's sexist at best, he's a misogynist at worst. It's encouraged, and I think that's part of it. Certainly, the online attacks are attacking women. It's sexualized, it's gendered, and that's. I'm worried about the values of the next generation. These are influence operations, and that's the other reason I feel that Facebook has a lot to answer for. So here's the thing: with that verdict this Monday, that thing that they seeded, the narrative that they seeded on social media in 2016, that Maria Ressa is a criminal, it only took 4 years, but they weaponized the law, and then now I've been declared a criminal. Right?
But there hasn't been a sentence to the degree that you would know how. Well, we will have
there
to
has
see,
been. It's an indeterminate sentence, and
which means
it means that my former colleague, and I could be jailed anywhere from 6 months and a day up to 6 years.
But they haven't said for how long they would jail you, or it would be a surprise. How is that working? In the German court case, they would say you are sentenced to prison for 3 years. So that didn't happen.
It's normally like that. This is special. I've been very special. I've gotten such special treatment.
So they
from
may
my
come
government.
one day, put you into prison, and you don't know for how long. That's the situation you're facing right now.
I hope that's not it, but certainly there's a veneer of legality, and we will challenge all of this in court.
Okay.
But
so
when
you
you
can
are
challenge
charged,
it in court.
we must, right? And because
of course you have to, but I'm happy to know that at least there's another legal way to go. Otherwise, well,
yeah, there's a veneer of legality, and I do see a question here that goes to the case. It's a veneer of legality, and then what happens is that it is then used to create more narratives to tear down your reputation, and then that narrative that's seeded online is repeated by authority, and here you go again, right? This is propaganda at its worst.
Well, and eats up a lot of resources in terms of time, in terms of emotion, in terms of resources, in terms of everything. I can clearly see that, and just keeps you from doing the important work you went back to the Philippines for. Maria, I think I had two very good questions in the comments I have been following. The first one, because we have been talking about emotions. How do you master the fear? Are you afraid? How do you master the tension if it's not fear?
I think, Hannah, I have a sense you do the same thing. When I was really young, my family moved to the United States, and I was a short brown kid who could barely speak English, and I was afraid. Everyone was so much taller than I was, and they were speaking a language that was going so fast. And one of the things I learned when I was in school is that you are your own worst enemy, that fear prevents us from doing what we want to do. So when I was very young, I learned to embrace my fear, whatever that fear is, and to keep moving forward. I had to give the commencement speech for the class of 2020. Actually, it was a privilege to do this at Princeton at their virtual ceremony. And I wrote this as one of the two things: embrace your fear. And that I was writing that at the time when I was embracing my fear, because I did expect a guilty verdict. It's consistent with the pattern and the trend of harassment and intimidation. And I knew that I had to walk in not afraid. How are you not afraid? It's not by not being afraid, right? Courage comes from confronting your fears, from touching it, and then robbing it of its powers to paralyze you. And that's a good lesson I've learned in life. And I guess that's the way I look at the day today. I feel like President Duterte knows my work. He's known it. I interviewed him in late 80s when we were both much younger.
And he hates it, and that makes you just the more happy.
I think he hates it now. Well, I can't even say that
Yeah.
because I try not to take it personally, right? It's just my job. That is my job. We are holding power to account. And frankly, power, which I think you know, Hannah, power should actually embrace that because it's a check and balance, right? We can
It
help
makes
make whatever
power
you're doing
better.
better. Exactly.
It's not an
That's,
attack, it's an idea on how you could do it better.
please
And
come back
that's
and
the
let
heart
my
of democracy. I actually
exactly.
wanted to come back. We had planned with the Human Rights Committee to travel to the Philippines in May, but well, Corona killed everything. But for sure, Maria, I'm coming back. Well, we have, but that leads to the second question. There are presidential elections in 2022, and we can be as mad about Duterte as we want to be, but you won the first one. You won it?
He did.
It was a democratic election. We can discuss the election law of the Philippines, but according to the election law that we have, he won.
Yes.
I'm sure he's
But
running for a second time.
he can't. It's
Oh, he
only one
can.
6-year
Oh, he
term.
can.
Yeah.
And
The
he has not yet
constitutional
started
limits.
to find a way to continue.
I think he has. I think what we're seeing is a consolidation of power. And what I think this verdict, along with events in the Philippines recently, actually codifies the kind of ad hoc abuses of power, the derailment of the Philippine Constitution. There have been ad hoc. A lot of things have been happening, but what happened with this verdict, it codifies the attack on media, on journalists, right? It now gives you these kinds of draconian laws about extending the prescription of libel from 1 year to 12 years. 2 weeks ago, the House of Representatives passed an anti-terror bill that is draconian at best, and according to a former Supreme Court justice, is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional. It essentially gives a small group of cabinet secretaries the ability to call any critic a terrorist. And when they do that, they can arrest them without a warrant, they can jail them and keep them in jail for at least 24
Well, and it puts
days.
everybody in constant fear of being labeled that way just for speaking up.
And that connects to why you want to silence people who are asking tough questions, right? But I think if this pushes through, and all it needs is President Duterte's signature, he may hear everyone really, unhappy about it, afraid of it. And even if he doesn't sign it, within 30 days, that bill will become a law. And here's my fear. This is a country that fought for democracy, that understood what democracy is. And today we're at the precipice.
Where did it get lost, Maria? Because I spoke actually to an old friend of mine, Sozi Moli from UP. And what he said is, where did we as a generation, he's like, I don't know, 60 plus for sure. So he was one of the ETSA, People's Power Movement people, for my European friends. He said, where did we fail that we now have this generation that kind of accepts this? And that leads to another question I saw, Maria, because I think, as you said, it's most important that Filipinos do something about it.
Absolutely.
What can Filipinos do?
I think we are starting to wake up and we're starting to realize that we're living through democracy's death by 1,000 cuts. It's like this, and I've seen this under Suharto in Indonesia, right?
That's
small
a very
little
good
cuts.
picture, by the way, death by 1,000 cuts. It's not the big one that everybody can see, it's just the many ones, and then it's...
Yes.
They know their job.
You lose so much blood that you will die, right? And that is, I think, the verge of where we are. How did we get here? It kind of like the United States, it's a perfect storm, right? In the US, they had that 99%, the 1%. Liberal democracy's values didn't trickle down fast enough. And the Philippines has always had weak institutions. While our Constitution is patterned after the United States, it has a Bill of Rights, we have endemic corruption, weak rule of law, we have violence. if you have weak rule of law, now I don't even know what to call what's happening in the drug war, right? But with weak
Well, that's no rule
institutions,
of law.
yeah,
No, sorry, but people are not even taken to court, so there is no rule of law. There's rule of the streets, of the violence, of the whatever.
and that is part of the reason I feel like in many instances, while I am submitting myself to the judiciary, I feel that in many ways, because of what we see outside, that our institutions have collapsed. President Duterte is the most powerful leader we've had, more powerful than Ferdinand Marcos. He declared martial law in 1972 and shut down
And there, how many?
ABS-CBN.
I think 3,500 died under martial law. Do we have
3,000, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
about
imagine Duterte,
3,200.
it's 10 times.
Yes, yes. So think about this now. This is the most powerful man. He never had to declare martial law. He kind of, again, death by 1,000 cuts, right? So,
So what do we do
what
again, Maria? What do we do?
some things have changed in 2020. And
Okay.
President Duterte, so here's the reason, part of the reason for his great popularity, and everyone points this out. He has approval ratings in the 80+%, right? Unlike, say, President Trump. President Duterte's approval ratings are high. He was one of 5 presidential candidates. He just, he won the vote and then consolidated. I asked him a question in December 2016. I was one of 4 interviews that he gave, and I asked him, is it important to you that violence be part of your leadership style? He said yes, because that is what's necessary for the Philippines. People need to be afraid, so violence and fear. Well, now that we're coming up on this, 4 years in, right? It's tough to see the Philippines you knew when you were here, because social media has allowed the astroturfing of things, statements, narratives like it's okay to kill. They were just drug addicts. This is a country that was one of the first signatories to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. We're a Catholic, we're Asia's largest Catholic nation, right? So it's shocking to me, but this proves to me the power of social media. And then I think the other part is this. Because the elite politics left so many people out, there's anger against the elite. And it is anger that's
And that was there
by the
when
government.
I was there. There's this anger about
That's
all
correct.
these families who just
Yes.
shared the wealth of the country, and he built on it, and he had a point on that one. And that's sadly, that's often the case, that they actually rightfully describe the problems, only their recipes are not helping. But that's another issue.
Correct. It's a tough, so my worry is that when I first came back to the Philippines in 1986, this is the end of 21 years of Ferdinand Marcos. It took the police, the national police, a decade to put back the restraints of human rights, a human rights frame of thinking, right? Now, with such violence, how long will it take to give this back? How can we get back to a society that is equal, that is compassionate, that is sustainable, right? These are questions that I have. And the hard part is, at a time when the entire world is connected, we have folded in and we have accepted the violence and the fear. I always say, the 3 C's are really important right now: corrupt, coerce, co-opt. And if you don't do any of these things, if you don't follow any of the 3 C's, then you'll be targeted. And that's part of the reason I have a guilty verdict. I am a cautionary tale for journalists. Be careful or you're going to be next. What happened to her can happen to you.
But Maria, that's something what to me makes you, and especially so many women in the Philippines special, that you have to undergo all this nastiness and all this, well, it's more than nastiness, it's just a nice word of putting what you all have to go through, and still having the courage and the mindset to think about how can we rebuild it more sustainable, how we can rebuild it more on human rights. It's not to go into that fighting attitude, but still having the headspace for thinking about alternatives and how much more beautiful the country could be. And Actually, me personally, it gives me a lot of hope, Maria.
I think we have to have hope. I started by telling you three things had changed in 2020, right? I think the first one is the pandemic. We are in
How
our
did it
13th.
change things?
Well, I'll give you the three. The first is the pandemic, which is now where it's probably the most militaristic that, not the most, but it's certainly among the world's most militaristic one. President Duterte, in typical fashion, in a late night national address, he told Filipinos, stay home, follow the quarantine rules.
Yeah, or
And then
I'll
he
shoot
told,
you. And I was just like, whoa, is he serious?
he said, shoot them dead. That's a direct quote. And the very next day, a 63-year-old farmer was shot and killed, right? Because he was stopped at a checkpoint because he didn't have
Well,
a
and he kind of
mask.
gave the legitimacy to others to execute his orders. Well, that's how police works.
Yes, yes. So
Yeah,
the
that was
pandemic
super
is,
worrying to see that quote.
but here's the other thing that happened that same night when the president said that. Filipinos who were locked down at home began tweeting, and the hashtag Oust Duterte Now trended. That would have been unthinkable before the pandemic, right? The second thing that happened was the shutdown of ABS-CBN, the largest network in the Philippines. When I was still with ABS-CBN, the market cap was about $450 million. In the time of Duterte, that market cap rolled back to about $300 million because it was constantly under attack. That's unthinkable. The last time that happened was in 1972 when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law, and it stayed shut for 14 years. And then the third thing that happened is the anti-terror bill, and it has many Filipinos. It is scaring Filipinos. These three things seem to be waking
So he's
our,
kind of
our nation up.
overstepping. He's kind of overstepping. Well, there wasn't a line or a law. It never was. That's part of the
Yeah,
problem. But he's kind of overdoing it.
I think it's tough because now the government has to deliver, and it isn't an enemy that you can demonize. It's a virus. Although President Duterte did say at one point he would slap the virus, you can't demonize a
Yeah, and it's
virus.
just a small flu like Bolsonaro. I mean, it's kind of a clique, huh?
Correct, correct, correct. I mean, they were also elected. Again, the trend to these types of populist authoritarian style leaders was enabled by technology, right? So what are we going to do? You said it. I have not lost hope. I believe that, look, all around the world, we are standing on the rubble of the old world. It's not just in the Philippines. Our economy is going to contract this year. Millions will lose their jobs. The government must deliver. And I was hoping that the government would actually pay attention to what it has to do instead of running after its supposed critics. All I'm trying to do is to do my job. I haven't done anything differently from every single administration in the Philippines and other countries I've worked in around the world, right? So the reason I have hope is because this is the time when people's imaginations, a vision for a better future, empathy and compassion, right? Even though it's bereft in the language of President Duterte, I know it's there in the Philippines. I know Filipinos. This is why I chose this as my country. Look, I'm getting upset. I get upset only when I think about the impact
No,
of
but
all of this.
it's so inspiring. It's like
I know
really,
this nation.
it's these moments where, well, that show me how much it matters that there are people who speak up, and who speak up with compassion and love and not with hate and destruction. And it gives
It's
others hope,
necessary,
Maria.
right?
Your hope gives others hope.
But I think that the young generation, I think they're seeing it, they're waking up. I think they will demand better. All I'm saying is demand better. And people always ask me, is the President Duterte have anything against you? Do you have anything against President Duterte? I have nothing against him. He's the
You don't
president.
even care about him, huh? Not that
I'm
much,
just
but
I'm trying to be a good journalist, which is what I've done, right? And I want him to do a good job because where he goes, he takes our entire nation. And frankly, even though they're good at propaganda, it doesn't solve the problems. And he will need all of our help to solve these problems. And, I wish the administration would have some humility to say it doesn't have the answers and to ask for help, because Filipinos want to help. But instead of being defensive or hiding, we need greater transparency. We need a healing effort rather than a splintering, right? This is what we mean. In Rappler, we call it hashtag courage on, right? We need courage. This is a different world. So we need to collaborate. Sorry,
Yes, and
I will
think
shut up.
no. I mean, I wanted to have this Insta live to have your voice out there and to learn from you. So you don't, no excuses. That's exactly what I hope for. How can I you said rightfully it's so important that especially the Filipinos, you said, I think someone in the commentary said, wake them up, or that they take their claims to the streets. And I think that is what makes it strongest. Still, what can we as the International Human Rights Committee, or people who care about democracy, people who care about the Philippines, I mean, because of all these expats, there are Filipinos everywhere, and we all have kind of Filipino friends, and there's this abstract connection with the country, even for people who have never been in the Philippines. What is it that we can do to support? That would be my last question.
Don't forget us. I think that's one. You know, I think part of the reason Rappler and I have survived 4 years of attacks is because of the kindness of strangers. The only defense a journalist has when you're attacked is to do the stories, to shine the light. And I've been lucky enough, you know, I spent almost 20 years of my life working outside the Philippines, and colleagues have known how I work. I now have worked longer in the Philippines than I have outside. But if we didn't have the international news groups, if the news groups here in the Philippines weren't doing our stories, it would be easy. The Washington Post has their new tagline, democracy dies in darkness, right? Democracy dies in darkness. So I think that's one. Please ask about us. Please nudge your friends to be more transparent. If they're in government, please bring this up, because these are their values. And one of my greatest fears is that levels of corruption will go up. It will happen in the dark. We will shackle our next generation to debt, and we will kill the future. I don't want that to happen. And that's part of the reason we keep doing our jobs. Talk to your friends in the Philippines. Nation, you have bilateral relations with the Philippines, right? I think the one
Philippines
thing that,
even have a tax exemption that we are challenging, because it came actually with promises to improve the human rights situation, and well, the situation did not exactly improve, but
this
the
is
exemptions are
GP.
still there. So
Yes, yes. And actually, that's part of the reason. What's interesting to me is that when I don't shut up, right? Also because I know that's my only defense. Because when you fight great power and you're one journalist, you don't stand a chance. But one of the things I realized early on was that when I was speaking, the Philippine government sent a secretary to Europe to talk to European governments. So you're quite important to my government. You know, please let them know. Let's bring back values.
Maria. We're working on it, believe me. And I'm trying to get the Human Rights Committee to travel to the Philippines as soon as it's possible. I will come for sure again, and then we will be able to
I would love to take you for a meal. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
we really have to do that. Adobo talong, so if you want to know which it should be, adobo talong has been my favorite. I even know how to cook it here. So
wow, that's funny. That's funny.
But
I'm
there's
so glad.
Well, aside of knowing more and getting an update of the situation of the Philippines, for me now the biggest takeaway was, Maria, that this term "embrace your fear," it kind of captures what somehow it puts words on a feeling that I often had. It meant you go in there, you go out of your comfort zone, you know you have to do it, you don't feel good, but you do it with all the strength you can find. And
it's
Thank you very much for
fear.
giving this feeling a word.
I think this is like the stages of loss, right? Fear is, there's that beating in your heart, that sinking stomach, and then you get through it and you come out with courage if you
And
confront it.
strong, so strong. Maria, you are also. And well, we stay in touch. Thank you so very
Thank
much
you.
for also sharing with all my European friends. That's, you said it nicely. You shed light on the situation, and that was one of the attempts, because we are so much occupied with our own COVID struggle right now. And I really do not allow us to forget that the world out there has its struggles. It has had it before, and sometimes they even got worse because of the COVID. And
Can I add
together
one
we are
last thing on
strong.
COVID?
Sure, you can
So
add one last thing on COVID, Maria.
what you said about together we are strong, right? I think people forget that when you're fighting a pandemic, a virus, we're only all as strong as our weakest link, which means, these kinds of like vertical silos of each nation handling this on its own, the world isn't going to stay shut down forever. So we do need your help in this. I think, the Philippines says it doesn't have the resources. It does, but I think we all need to come together globally to fight the virus, because we're only as strong as the weakest link. If it erupts in a country that isn't handling it well, it will spread to all the other nations. That's my only thing. I still believe, you can't leave anyone behind.
But it's an important lesson, because it clearly shows this pandemic helps with the public good. That's an important lesson in the first place. It doesn't help us if
Yes.
just those with the private health care are well off, and it's a global good. And if we learn that lesson from the pandemic, we have, well, moved ahead. Thank you so much, Maria. You have a very nice evening, and I just hope that,
Thank you.
let's say, as soon as possible, either you can come to Europe or I will be able to come to the Philippines, and this world gets together again and be just more peaceful. We really need this. Thank you so much.
Soon.
It was super nice. I will. Thank you so much, Maria. Bye.
Bye, Hannah.